What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Slate. We've got a fun one here for you on a Tuesday with Shirag Hira and Matt Meiselman, both decked out. I am Adam Kaufman, and it's going to be pretty much all hoops, I think, here for this show, boys, even though it is just a light 5-game slate in the association after obviously a busier night last night. We've got some compelling games, some interesting matchups, some guys that are going to be popping in that we haven't seen in a while. Obviously, some key guys absent, so there's value all over the place in DFS. There's much to get into as the playoffs near in the next couple of weeks. Should be a lot of fun. Shirag, Matt, how are you?
Doing great. Can't complain. Happy to be here.
Pretty good, aside from Robert Williams, who I'm sure we'll talk about. Everything else is wonderful, though.
Let's put that off because I don't want to talk about that and my personal Celtics fandom for a little while. But really, we've got, we'll show you the odds and some of the stuff that we're looking at courtesy of the DraftKings Sportsbook. But guys, we have some good games tonight, and it begins right away, 7 o'clock Eastern, less than 2 hours from right now. We have a matchup of teams that are jockeying for seeding in the Eastern Conference, could very well meet in the playoffs at some point down the line. That is the Bucks at the Sixers. Both these teams have been playing well. Milwaukee 7 out of 10, Philly 6 out of 10 on the other side. We expect a whole lot of offense, which is great in that for fantasy purposes, obviously, north of 230 total points. And again, you got two teams that are tied for second in the Eastern Conference, 46 and 28 Celtics, who, of course, Matt just alluded to, in a virtual tie for that spot as well. All three of these teams only one game behind Miami, a Heat team that's kind of reeling at the top of the East at the moment. So, Shirag, what are the expectations for this one?
I'm super excited about this one. Finally, we have a game that the first thing to point out, though, this slate is actually very odd. Locks at 7, and then a couple games at 7:30, and then another one at 10 o'clock. So That's very interesting to me. But I'm really excited about this matchup between the Bucks and the Sixers here. Sixers coming off that kind of weird loss against the Suns, that they were ahead in that game. I was watching that one, and it was very interesting because Joel Embiid played really, really well, and it just wasn't the other pieces that were able to hold it together when he went to the bench, allowing Phoenix to get back into this game. I'm really excited to see Giannis and Chris Middleton back in the contest together. I know that they were able to get together in that Memphis loss a little bit, but I just think that there's an opportunity here for this game to be the featured one of the slate. I want exposure to this matchup from fantasy perspective. I have matchup bets on this from looking at the Milwaukee side, just taking the underdog from there. I just think that there's a lot of opportunities here, and potentially what I have been noticing lately, what I did especially with that Phoenix and Philly game, is that when the teams are making runs, you're able to potentially look at first half bets, same quarter bets, or these close games are usually going to be crunch time games, and the Suns are a really strong crunch time team. So I was confident in taking them as a live bet, but maybe looking if Milwaukee gets out way ahead to a lead and live betting Philadelphia. That's kind of what's been my perspective. I just enjoy watching these games and finding angles to kind of bet them because basketball is a game of runs.
What's interesting, Matt, with this first game, Philadelphia and Milwaukee, is from a fantasy perspective, and I'm certainly not telling the people out there have no exposure to these guys or anything like that, but there are just more attractive fantasy options in other games. This isn't one that really presents a whole lot of guys that you say, okay, I got to wedge them into my lineup. I certainly think Joel Embiid is in a really good spot, and I think he's going to be, that'll be reflected in the ownership tonight. Giannis Antetokounmpo, and he's probable to play right now, technically listed as game time decision, but he is probable. I don't think he's in a great spot. That being said, I certainly wouldn't advocate for fading him. In fact, there's always a part of me when I see matchups like this, two guys that are in the MVP conversation as well, even though we'll get to this a little bit later, neither one is the favorite. To me, that's still Nick Jokic. But, I look at these two guys and just say, this feels like one of those one-on-one kind of nights, where they both just go off. They both have north of 60 fantasy points. You're going to want to have plenty of both in your lineups. But what's your view?
I think my view is that from a DFS perspective, James Harden is the overlooked guy here, just like what you were saying. I mean, Jokic, I think, should be the MVP, but the top three, according to just about anyone, is Jokic, Embiid, and Giannis. So this is sort of an MVP duel in most people's minds. So maybe that influences the ownership a bit. But I think the other thing that is a strong consideration for ownership is the fact that Luka Doncic has an unbelievable matchup against the Lakers. He's probably a little bit underpriced, and he's a guard, and James Harden is the same position as Luka. So to choose Harden over Luka is purely an ownership move. I mean, no one is going to say that James Harden expects to score more than Doncic, but I think you could make the case that the Dallas Mavericks are very likely to blow out the Lakers, and then Luka ends up having a dud because he doesn't play in the fourth quarter. So that's definitely on the table. I think Harden's a pretty good leverage play. I like this game, though, from a contrarian perspective to some extent, but a lot of it is also going to come down to what happens with Zach Levine, because if you get Levine not playing, you get a lot more attention on DeMar DeRozan for DFS players, and he's small forward, power forward, or I think maybe even just power forward now.
Just power forward, yeah.
But Giannis is no longer a center. So that's a direct conflict now where you have two forward-only players in DeRozan and Giannis. So Levine being ruled out would mean more ownership for DeRozan, less for Giannis, and then playing Giannis with one of Harden or Embiid together, I think ends up making more sense. So this is a slate with moving parts. We didn't even talk about Rudy Gobert yet. But even short of the Rudy Gobert announcement, I think that this Bulls news is going to affect what you want to do with this Bucks and Sixers game.
So Sharad, just looking at it right now, and you outlined it perfectly before, you've got 2 7:00 games, 2 7:30 games, and then this other one that shouldn't even be, part of the slate because it's in a different universe. It's at 10 o'clock tonight when the other games are, kind of wrapping up, the Jazz and Clippers, and that's sort of a shame because I do think Gobert, if he plays, given his very low price tag, is going to be insanely popular if people can actually depend on him being available. But these earlier games, Giannis probable, so fine. That's the big one in that game. Chicago, Zach Levine, straight up questionable. We don't have an indication right now, but yes, he did play last night. Alex Caruso, by the way, is probable. Game time decision for Kyle Kuzma as well on the other side of that matchup. Detroit, nothing notable because, as we know, Diallo and Jeremy Grant now out for the season. Ben Simmons, of course, he's not going to play for Brooklyn, but you do have Kyrie Irving in a home game now and Kevin Durant. And then the Lakers, LeBron, doubtful. Davis, doubtful. Dwight Howard is probable, which, again, without Anthony Davis, is going to make him very popular tonight. And then for the other side, some of these lesser guys, if you will, no disrespect intended, but Tim Hardaway, Trey Burke, Sterling Brown, they are not going to play. Maybe it opens up some value elsewhere. But I guess the bigger thing is Matt was just talking about with Zach Levine as being a potential domino. Are we going to get all of this news, all this key news for these first 4 games of the slate before 7 o'clock lock, or are we going to have to adjust a little bit?
It looks like to me that we're going to probably get a lot of the news before 7 o'clock, or at least around 7 o'clock. The 7:30 game, you might get a different starting replacement for LeBron. So that might be the news that comes after 7 o'clock, is who's starting in place of LeBron. But I mean, we can probably guess that it'll be potentially Carmelo or Malik Monk, one of those guys that need scoring. They're not going to just drop the leading scorer in the league and say, okay, yeah, we're going to go play defense against Luka. No, he's scoring.
Not that team.
So you need scoring. So Malik Monk or Carmelo Anthony, 2 guys that can definitely step it up and fill it up in garbage time too. And I like potentially looking at a Stanley Johnson who's at 3,300. If this game gets out of hand, he'll get some time. When in Gabriel, he's been starting. Yes, he's not going to give you more than 20, 25 fantasy points, but you don't know when there's a game with the leading scorer in the NBA not playing, and potentially they blow out. So looking towards the end of this Lakers bench, Talen Horton-Tucker has not been playing well whatsoever. DJ Augustine also trying his best, but I think the starters, people are going to gravitate towards those guys. But maybe look at of all people that I really like and of plays that I like in this slate is probably Stanley Johnson. If this game gets out of hand, you're going to have a lot of him playing. But overall, I really like to bet on the Wizards, especially if the Zach Levine news turns out as doubtful or from questionable to out. I took a little piece on them earlier last night because Chicago was on second night of a back-to-back on the road. They've been on this road trip right now for a little bit. So this is the last 3rd game that I've been betting on them. And I'm like, I don't like this thing. Matt drilled it in my head. Stop betting bigger road favorites. Road favorites are There have been a lot of road favorites this year, but it's a little bit more difficult position to cover. So I just like my bets are so far been Milwaukee and Washington to start the slate, and then we'll look at what happens with Rudy Gobert.
You mentioned Matt Luka Doncic, and he is right now, barring obviously changes before lock, but at the moment, in terms of projections, he is expected to be in about a third of lineups, which makes him the chalkiest play, never mind stud play, but the chalkiest play period of this entire slate as we sit here right now, coming up on 5:30, an hour and a half away from lock. And I'm going to play him. I'm certainly going to play him. I'm going to have plenty of exposure. But I'm not going to do it with a good feeling, I'm going to have a pit in my stomach because I'm going to be looking at it just as you outlined it. Looking at the DraftKings Sportsbook, the Mavericks, yes, they're at home. They're 12 point favorites against a Lakers team that won't have its two superstars. Yes, Russell Westbrook will be out there, but it won't have Anthony Davis. It won't have LeBron James. Again, both are doubtful. And it just feels like the kind of night DFS wise that Luka gets off to an insane start. And at halftime, he's got 35 points in the fire emoji. And then the game ends and he's got 47 in the snowflake because he barely plays and they just blow him out of the water. I don't know. I mean, how do you attempt to guard against that? Do you just try and tell yourself that's the way it's going to go and you don't play him, or do you have to have him out there?
Definitely don't have to play him. I think it more of this comes down to who you're playing with him, because Luka is probably not going to be the guy you want in your lineup for a GPP if it's a blowout. He could get 60 fantasy points in 3 quarters. That's definitely on the table. But for him to likely hit his ceiling, you probably need a close game. So if I'm playing Luka, you probably want at least one of Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, Malik Monk, Dwight Howard, maybe even Stanley Johnson, someone on the Lakers, because the Lakers are going to have to score to keep pace if Luka is not going to be on the bench in the 4th quarter. So I think a mini game stack of sorts is the way to approach this. In a vacuum, I think Luka probably is a guy to fade, because I do really think that the blowout probability here is that high. Like, the Lakers are bad with LeBron. The Mavericks are a good team. LeBron is the Lakers' best player by a mile. He's their only good player right now, with Anthony Davis also out. So the Lakers are not on the level of like Portland and Oklahoma City with their current roster, but they're only a tier up from those teams. Like, who's better right now, the Wizards or the LeBron-less Lakers? I don't even think that's close. I think it's the Wizards. So this game could definitely be a blowout. I think people will probably underestimate that risk because Luka Doncic is going to show up in all the optimizers because the matchup's really good. And right. I think considering the blowout potential there is a big deal. So if you're playing Luka, you probably want a Laker with him. That's how I would attack it. But just to add context to a couple other points, Chirag mentioned the road favorites thing. I think the reason to be wary of that in general is that when you see a team favored by 2, 3, or 4 points, 5 points, something like that on the road, it's usually because that team is significantly better than their opponent. For a team to be 4-point road favorite, after factoring in home court advantage, they have to be like 6 or 7 points better. And usually they're only a couple points better, but people like to bet on the better team. So they will overlook how many points that team is laying. They will undervalue home court advantage, and they'll just say, the Bulls are a playoff team, the Wizards are bad, and I like the Bulls to win. If they're going to win, they'll probably win by 4 or more points because fouling at the end, whatever, like, I'll just take the Bulls. But what people often fail to consider is that those few points do matter. First of all, home court advantage matters. And then you often get these situations where you have the Bulls, like, who are a veteran team on a back-to-back with, honestly, even if Zach Levine plays, I'm not even that worried about him. He's dealing with a knee injury. His minutes could be limited. He's probably not going to be full strength version of Zach Levine because they just played New York last night. Now they have to travel down to DC. This is not an easy situation for guys like Levine, DeRozan, Vucevic. They're not young players. So I think that's, people miss all the variables, and that tends to manifest in road favorites being overvalued. It's not that you can never bet them, but for the most part, I think a typical 3 or 4 point favorite on the road is a team like the Bulls, who, I mean, I guess I could just say this, like, I never need a reason to bet against this year's Chicago Bulls. They're just, I think, the most overrated team in the NBA. I'm happy to be on the opposite side of them every game. And the other part of this is I do not care that Kyle Kuzma is not playing. if there's a most overrated team, that's the Bulls. If there's a most overrated player, it's Kuzma, and that combination is working so favorably for this game because you're probably getting a couple of extra points on the Wizards side because Kuzma's not there. And Kuzma not playing, all that means to me is you have a bunch of low probability shots going to Kristaps Porzingis, who's much better, and Denny Avdija, who I think is better. And you have Thomas Satoransky playing point guard now, who might be better than Neto and Ish Smith. Like, he's a decent veteran point guard. Like, this team's not that bad. They're not a playoff team as currently constructed, but they're not that bad. And I think KCP honestly would be the Lakers' third best player. Like, he's fine. This is not a terrible Wizards team. So I'm obviously with Chirag. Like, I don't need a reason to fade the Bulls, but I think this situation does set up really well for them.
Well, let's stay with you because you kind of maybe just answered this, and then we'll go to Chirag with the same question. But what of these 5 is your favorite game to bet tonight?
So the current answer is the Wizards. I think if you get Levine ruled out, you just take it right away. If you get Levine in, you wait for the line to move up a half point or a point. I think it probably gets to 4.5 as people react to that news, and then you just take the Wizards at a higher number. That's probably how I would handle that situation. But the bet that could be better than that is the Clippers if Rudy Gobert doesn't play. Right now, the Clippers are -1, and we, by all indications, are assuming Paul George will be available.
Still
the thing with, yeah, it's still right around there. I think we have -1 on the screen, but it's pretty close to pick 'em.
Yeah.
The Gobert normally in the past, like, I think Rudy Gobert is a top 10 player in the NBA because he's the most valuable defensive player in the NBA. His offense is average-ish, and the full picture of that is a really, really good player. In the past, though, you had Hassan Whiteside there as his backup, and Whiteside is a well above average backup center. But right now, we don't have Whiteside playing, which means that if Gobert is out, the center combination for the Utah Jazz tonight is Juancho Hernan-Gomez, Eric Pascal, Greg Monroe, and I guess Royce O'Neal can play some center. So it's a much larger drop off in the center spot than it would have been otherwise. They just don't have anyone to play center really that's any good. So Gobert down to those guys is a much larger deal than Gobert to Whiteside, which maybe is worth only a few points. I think Gobert to these other players, the Clippers should be like 6 or 7 point favorites at this point if Gobert doesn't play. So that becomes my favorite bet. And then I'll just wrap this up by saying we lost the Wizards game because Zach Levine.
I was going to say, I don't know. I don't know. Did we just get news? Is Zach Levine in?
Yeah, Zach Levine's going to play. So, you probably can get the Wizards like +4 or +4.5 now once this comes back up, which I still really like. I don't think it's that big of a deal Levine's playing.
Well, and I'm excited he's playing for the sake of my season-long basketball team. Chirag, I want to talk more about that night game, but first for you, as I mentioned before, same question as Matt, which is your favorite to bet tonight?
Well, it was the Wizards. I'm just going to have to go along with what Matt's saying because I already have a position on the Wizards. I added to it when Levine got downgraded. That's usually a news play. This is the second time in a row that he's been downgraded to injury management and actually played. Literally the second time in a row that has happened. So the next time when this happens, he's going to end up not playing, and I'm going to not take the bet because I'm going to say, oh, he's going to play now. So let's wait to see how this line moves because I really like to see just how it kind of transforms and if it actually plays out in the way that we were talking about it just now. But the Wizards are my favorite bet. I also believe that Kyle Kuzma is an amazing player. He's an offensive machine, a threat from all 3 levels, and he doesn't really play in defense. But he doesn't matter for the perspective of it. Kristaps Porzingis is definitely better than him, and it's already moved to +4 right here as we can see.
And that Milwaukee game has now come off the board
because Giannis just got officially ruled in.
Okay, so we'll
5:30. So they're giving us the news.
Nice and early.
Rudy Gobert.
We still got an hour and a half from lock, just about. It's a wonderful thing. We thank these. That's I got to say too. I've been so appreciative of what's going on as I was going through looking at injury reports before this show here. With so many guys either just straight up ruled out for the remainder of the season down the stretch, or like the news is coming out well in advance of compared to what it's been like all season long, and not even talking about with the unpredictability and uncertainty of COVID protocols and that type of thing, just straight up injury news. It's like, yeah, it would linger. You'd have a laundry list of guys that were game time decisions. Teams are getting all that nonsense right out of the way, getting it to us nice and early, and I appreciate it.
Yep, most definitely.
It's a good thing. On that front, let's keep talking about that night game. And I know we've talked a lot about Rudy Gobert, not enough about Paul George, if you ask me, because he is on track to play. He's technically a game time decision, but he is on track to play his first game since December in this one at home against the Jazz. And guys, I don't know, maybe it makes me, Chirag, sound uneducated, uninformed, but I'm not kidding. When I saw the news that Paul George was on track to play tonight, my first thought was, is this his season debut? Like, the guy has not, he's played 26 games this year. I had to look it up. Yeah. He's played 26 games this year, but he's been out so long that I genuinely forgot we've even seen him this season.
Yeah, he has. I mean, when you damage your elbow to that extent, you're going to be out a while.
Yeah.
So, but I think, I mean, the crazy part is when he was playing, like, he was good. PG of old. He was PG of old. I was like, all right, this dude is back. He took all the hate from the last couple of years, and he's really transformed that. And you know, there's a lot of players that just cower down and they get so much of that noise. And that's like, well, Paul George almost carried them to the finals. If he had Kawhi even for a game or two, they probably can get past the Suns there. But that's neither here nor there, because now the Suns are going to run through everybody.
What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, it's I guess really where this matters the most for Paul George is with the play-in tournament, because the Clippers are basically a lock to wind up there now. I think even with George, they're a notch below Denver, Minnesota, Dallas. I think they're probably that tier, but the lower end of that tier. But this definitely elevates them ahead of the Lakers and Spurs, who they could potentially face in the second play-in game if they lose the first one. I actually really like the Pelicans roster a lot, so I'm not sure that I think the Clippers are better than the Pelicans. They'd be favored. They're close enough that the game being in LA, if that's like the tie-break game where the Pelicans win as the 9 seed, the Clippers loses the 8, and then they play each other. The Clippers are probably like a 1 or 2 point favorite in that game now because of the home court advantage, but I actually like the New Orleans roster a little better. But without George, the Clippers were in real trouble because this is not a good team right now. I think Marcus Morris has taken a step back this year. Reggie Jackson has taken a step back. He was just really good last year. Luke Kennard hasn't been as effective as I think people would have hoped. So there are some good pieces on this team. I think Zubac is good. I think Hartenstein, that's like a solid center pairing. I think that their veterans are average, but they don't have any good players besides Kawhi and George. They just have a bunch of average players. So this is a really big deal for them in terms of getting into the playoffs, but I'm still not very optimistic about them making a run in the playoffs, because Kawhi is too important. And I think they're in the same boat as a team like Minnesota or Dallas, where it's just, they're one really good player away from being a true contender. And that player would be Kawhi Leonard. I don't know why he hasn't pushed himself more to come back this season. Maybe it's money related, who knows? But I think it's a big deal for tonight for sure, because this roster needs him. They really have not been playing that well over the last couple of months.
So we have a question on YouTube from Carter Robinson, who's watching along, says, what are you guys thinking about Andre Drummond tonight? Good play at $5,500. So before you guys go, there are, I'm looking at it right now, and there are 10 guys, let's say, ballpark 10 guys. I don't know if that's the exact number, but ballpark 10 guys that I think are the best plays tonight in any price point, but they all happen to be sub 6K. And Andre Drummond is on that list. You've got Marvin Bagley. Dwight Howard certainly is a great play tonight for LA. Gabriel as well for the Lakers, who Chirag mentioned before. Corey Kispert, who's like one of the only Washington guys I think we didn't mention when we were talking about the Wizards earlier. Killian Hayes, Kelly Olynyk's in a really good spot. Daniel Gafford is in a great spot. I'm not saying you got to put all these guys in your lineup because you can afford more expensive guys, obviously, but there are a lot of really good value plays that are available to you tonight. And yes, Carter, Drummond's absolutely on that list. But Chirag, who stands out to you?
I mean, first thing to note is that Andre Drummond has, since getting into the starting lineup with the Nets, that last game against the Hornets was the most minutes he's played the entire time he's been on the Nets here. So they're giving him the ball. He's running the peace sign. He's ready to roll. So I mean, I think at 5,500, you definitely have to give him consideration, but just know that when the cost benefit, and when you look at it like, Rudy Gobert is really the only guy that you're totally like going to be sad about missing. Dwight Howard, I'm kind of questioning. Yeah, sure, he can go off and score 35, 40 fantasy points, but there's that potential blowout. Marvin Bagley, he's been playing well, but does Andre Drummond able to slow him down a little bit? They've had to move Bagley to power forward or to center, I think, because of the fact that Jeremy Grant is now done for the year and Kelly Olynyk's playing there too. So I just think that he does make a lot of sense, but this is another game. We have a situation where it could be a blowout. And is he going to get those minutes? Like I said, the most minutes he's had since joining the Nets as a starter was in the previous game. So he's trending in that direction, and maybe that makes you want to play him, but those minutes might not be the same with the Brooklyn sitting here double-digit favorites.
What do you say, Miles?
Yeah, there's a couple things to add here. I think the point of the blowout is definitely valid. And then I can segue into sports betting for this game because there's a situation here that I think is really, really interesting on the Pistons side. But first of all, Rudy Gobert, I think, is the best center play, and he's only just above that price range you were talking about at 7,300. The problem is we don't know for sure he's going to be in. I do think if you leave yourself the ability to swap with multiple roster spots in the late game and Gobert doesn't play, you can get Zubac, who's in the 5,000s, who gets a much better matchup if Gobert's not playing. You do have to worry about the game going small if there's no Rudy Gobert there. Both teams may just play. You can see Marcus Morris playing the 5 against like Royce O'Neal, but there's a lot of upside for Zubac if Gobert is not on the other side. It's just a way better matchup with no real interior threat to go against him. So that's an option. But I do like the idea of Drummond. The problem is, well, it's not just the blowout. LaMarcus Aldridge is now back on the Nets active roster, and he was a DNP coach's decision in the last game against the Hornets. Maybe they just wanted to give him a couple of practices to get him back in the rotation. So there's a chance he cuts into Drummond's minutes tonight. Drummond did play really well against Charlotte, but they lost the game. So sometimes, despite the fact that the player was really good, the result of the game could mean a change of something. And the Nets now have 3 centers that they like in Drummond and Claxton and Aldridge. I actually think Aldridge could get garbage time over both of them, because the goal for Aldridge, I think, is to get him reps, to get him ready for the playoffs, for the play-in tournament and then the playoffs. I don't see any way Drummond plays garbage time. I think either they let Aldridge get some run at the end of the game, or they just let Claxton play because he's much younger. So it is a real concern. I think the upside is there, but there is significant downside. The player that didn't get mentioned as a potential center in this range, though, is on the Pistons in Isaiah Stewart at $5,000. And I think we need to pull up the Pistons player props to look at Stewart here.
Sure.
So I will outline the situation. On Sunday morning, I saw that one of the Pistons beat writers posted a tweet from Dwayne Casey's press conference where he said that they were going to encourage Isaiah Stewart to shoot more threes down the stretch. Isaiah Stewart came into Sunday's game 4 for 18 on threes for the entire season.
Okay.
He had attempted 3 of them in his previous 5 games going into Sunday. He had made none of them. But this comment came out Sunday morning. The line on Stewart to make 1 3 was plus 700. This was about an hour or so before the game. And then when the game started, the line was only plus 400 roughly. So people were on this. And then he didn't even sniff a 3-point look until late second quarter. And then finally he got a look from the top of the key and made it. And then the next possession, he shot another one and almost made that one. He ended up making 1 more in the third quarter. So this is a guy who just went 2 for 3 from 3 in a game where he had made 4 threes the entire year. The Pistons have played 60-something games this year, or 70 games this year at this point. Stewart's played in 60-something of them. This could actually be a trend where Isaiah Stewart shoots a 3 or 2 or 3 a game going down to the end of the year, because the Pistons don't need to win. Jeremy Grant's not playing. It's just a little more court spacing for everyone else. So we're still looking at plus 330 on the screen.
For
Isaiah Stewart, for half of he just needs to make 1. And this is a guy who, yes, he's now 6'4", 23. for this season. It's his second year in the league. Last year, he shot 21 of 63. So he's a career 28% roughly 3-point shooter. If you add those
Not
together, it's not like
bad.
you can't make them.
No.
Yeah.
So if he shoots
Come
two of
out,
them,
come
like, this is
out
the
and
best
say it,
bet of the
Matt.
day.
Hammer it. Hammer the plus 330 on the half a 3-pointer.
I'm trying to be a little subtle with this take, but I mean, this line, if he's going to shoot 2 threes a game, this line is ridiculous. If he's going to shoot more than 2 threes,
We're digging deep for sneaky props. I'm into it.
Yeah. Like if he makes one tonight, at the next Pistons game, this is going to be like pick him that he makes a 3. We're going to be looking at like minus odds potentially because he could just start chucking. I mean, there are guys that are nearly this bad at threes that shoot them all the time. Anthony Davis barely has a better 3-point percentage than Isaiah Stewart. He shoots a lot of them. So 28% is more than enough to at least attempt some, especially on a team that has no incentive to win right now. And they're playing the Nets, who they're probably not going to beat anyway. Like he'll probably shoot one tonight. It could be 2 or 3 of them. So this is definitely my favorite prop today. I don't know if you can really use this for DFS because hitting one extra 3-pointer is not like that many fantasy points. And if he's shooting a 3, it's a layup that he might have taken otherwise. So like this is negligible in terms of DFS. But from sports betting perspective, you're getting plus 330 on a guy to hit one shot from behind the arc when he might shoot 2 or 3 of them, if not more. So I'm very excited about this. He made 2 of them on Sunday. I have an Isaiah Stewart jersey coming in the mail. I'll wear it next week. It's not here yet. But
are you already invested in this in this prop bet tonight?
I wish it was the same. I wish I had the perspective going into Sunday because he was plus 700 for this bet. You're getting half the odds now. But yes, I really like this one. So I don't I feel uncomfortable touting it considering how bad of a 3-point shooter this guy is. But if he shoots a couple, we're just talking one make.
Yeah. We do have official news. Shams Charania from The Athletic. Sources, Clippers star Paul George will return tonight against Utah, barring a setback pregame after missing over 3 months with a UCL tear in his elbow. Major comeback for one of the NBA's best. So, obviously we've already kind of hit on how that impacts your thoughts from a betting perspective tonight. And obviously it's huge for LA. There's no doubt about that. And in the race for seeding and all that good stuff, a Clippers team that's really struggling too. 5 straight losses that has dropped LA to where they at now. Clippers are 8th in the West. Fairly safe, I would say, for the play-in tournament.
Yeah, they're basically stuck there. There were a couple games where the Pelicans could have won to maybe catch them. They lost a home game to the Spurs. I think they were a little too far back at 9. And then the teams in 5th, 6th, and 7th have been winning a bit. Yeah, like they're basically locked in. We
don't have any news regarding a possible minutes restriction for George or something like that. I'm just thinking about this from a DFS standpoint. His salary's still $9K.
Yeah,
like I don't see how you can. I don't see how you can go anywhere near him.
That situation on the Clippers, I think, has to be avoided because guys like Morris and Jackson are priced for George not to be there. And then George himself is way overpriced given like there's no way he's playing 35 minutes tonight, whether he's going to get 25 or 28 or 31, unless the game goes to overtime, his minutes are probably going to be fairly limited. The only situation I really like is the bigs on the Clippers if Rudy Gobert is not there to defend them.
So let's see, in the interest of time, because there are some things we want to hit on still, and we've got 5-7 minutes left. Taking a look at some of the futures here. Let's look at the awards futures, though. It's picking up a lot of steam, guys. We've been doing this show for a long time, and I've been touting this for months. Nikola Jokic is the most valuable player for the 2nd straight year. Well, it's, he's risen the ranks for sure. He's plus 120. He's still 2nd behind Joel Embiid, minus 150. Of course, Matt talked about it earlier. Giannis is in that top 3 at plus 1,000. He's got Devin Booker, Luka Doncic, John Morant, DeMar DeRozan, Jason Tatum, Kevin Durant, all trailing him among others on the DraftKings Sportsbook. Chirag, I know you're not big on Jokic getting the repeat vote here, whether it's voter fatigue on from your headspace or no. You just think Embiid is that much better. I mean, what's the outlook?
Well, no. So here's the thing. So the first article on DK Nation that was ever written was actually me breaking down the MVP award. Okay. And I broke it down, and the things that I found there are the voters love repeat winners. the voters love guys that finish at the top of the conference. The only time we've had players that either weren't a repeat or didn't finish at the top of the conference, like saying top 3 seed, was when Russell Westbrook had that crazy year and went off for a triple-double, like 100 of them, whatever it was. And then the other year was Nikola Jokic, which was last year. And I believe that was kind of a fluke fall in the sense that the Nuggets were there all the way to the top of the season, and then Jamal Murray got hurt and yada, yada, yada. Just cascading effects had them fall down into, I think it was 5 or 6 seed. But those are the only times in NBA history or the last 25, 30 years where players weren't in the top 3 seed or repeating. So you guys mentioned this before we came on. The Nuggets, if they're playing in the Eastern Conference, they would be potentially battling for the number 1 seed here. So where does that come into play? Because in the West, you have the Nuggets, or sorry, not the Nuggets, you have the Suns running away with it, with Booker getting no love for the MVP vote, in which he should. He should at least be in the top 3. He's been roasting everybody. But I think that if Joel Embiid and the Sixers finish 1 or 2, like, it's gonna take the Nuggets to get into the top 3 or 4 to Jokic to get there. But there's been this weird, stupid straw poll thing that's been going around Twitter that I've been seeing all these guys talking about, and the straw poll is pulling for Jokic. So it makes no sense to bet Joel Embiid here whatsoever. And Nikola Jokic at plus 120, sure, you can take it, but like, what are you really gaining there? Embiid ends up winning the thing, and it's like, well, dang, he should have got it. But like, Embiid's having a great year. He was a runner-up last year. I just don't think there's any value here. Sure, you can take the bet for fun, but like plus 120, what are you gaining here?
Well, I agree there's no value. I think the time to bet Jokic was weeks, if not months ago, when we first started talking about this. But as far as the why, to your point, Chirag, I just think, this isn't true of Embiid. It's not true of Giannis. It's not true of Booker, but it's very true of Jokic. He has had nothing around him the vast majority of this year. He's doing it all by himself, taking this team maybe not as high in the West as he would be in the East, as you alluded to, but he's just doing things. He's having a better year than he did last year individually, and statistically, he is doing things that we have never seen before in this league, and I think it warrants, Matt, that consideration.
Yeah, first of all, I do think there's value at plus 120 because in my mind, this is basically a coin flip between these two guys. I don't think anyone else really has a chance. I think voter fatigue is more true for Giannis. He just hasn't done anything extraordinary. And the reason Booker's not getting more love, I think, is because there's a shift. I mean, Chirag talked about what used to drive MVP award winning. I think it's changing. I think that analytics have been embraced in sports for a long time now, but I think there's an increase in how much people care about them. It would be Jokic's award to lose. But if Philly does get the 1 seed, the narrative is probably too strong there.
One more thing, because I know we're about out of time, but I don't want Matt's wasted, his effort, his research to be wasted, nor Daniel's graphic design work. But defensive player of the year, guys. You were just talking, Matt, about the Celtics. Well, Marcus Smart is now the favorite on the DraftKings Sportsbook, plus 160, a guy who we could show the graphic months ago, only a couple months ago, was sitting at plus 15,000. He was nowhere near consideration for this award. And then it became, at least, certainly around Boston, this 2-horse race between Marcus Smart and Robert Williams. Well, now the Time Lord is out. The remainder, at least, of the regular season, if not the rest of the year in general. So really opens up a lane here for Marcus Smart to win this award. Is that your expectation, even though we haven't seen a guard win it since Gary Payton in 96?
So yeah, the guard thing is why he was off my radar. That's a crazy stat, by the way. That's just wild.
It's a Marcus Smart talks about it all the time. It's a big man's award now. A guard has not won Defensive Player of the Year since 96.
But yeah, that winner was the glove. So
right, yeah. I mean, Marcus Smart has a case to be that level of defender. I mean, he is really, really good. Although McCall Bridges has a lot of the same things going for him, but I think Smart has the narrative here. So first of all, like the idea that this guy was 40-1 10 days ago, is just so crazy to think about how quickly this has moved. And he was 150 to 1 about 2 months ago, but I think it's more insane that he was 40 to 1 only 10 days ago. But the fact that the Heat have been so bad, and specifically on defense, is really hurting Bam's case. And Chirag and I were on with Glash 2 weeks ago now, where I was talking about how Bam was really good value at plus 200. And I still think that was true at the time. Bam ended up moving closer to even money after that. But then the team just started performing so poorly and he went backwards. And then at that point, it's like, is Rudy Gobert going to win? You have voter fatigue there. He's been struggling a little. He's also missed some games recently. He had missed a bunch of games earlier in the year. I don't think anyone wants to give it to him. So then you have Bridges, who, if the Suns get the 1 seed, there's a strong case for him. But Robert Williams going out basically means that Marcus Smart is the most important player on the Celtics defense. And if the Celtics do manage to pull off the 1 seed, I think he certainly wins. So if I want to say, does he win the award? I want to be careful how I phrase that. I think it's below 50% still. I think he deserves to be the highest, but I think it's below 50% because there's a decent probability that Bridges wins. There's a decent probability the Heat wind up claiming the 1 seed anyway. Like, they just play better down the stretch. And if their defense is really good, the final 7 games, people will forget that they were bad for 5 games and Bam will just win. Bam is still very much live here. And if none of that happens and no one is spectacular the last 8 games, Bridges could win. We could see Giannis winning just by default because he's, I guess, like, the Bucks could get the 1 seed right, and then he has that argument for him. There's a lot of ways this could go. I do think it's correct that Smart is the favorite now, but this is still very much up for grabs. This has been, I think I've said it at multiple points this year, this has just been, it's been such a difficult award to forecast this year. Like, I've had, every time we've talked about Defensive Player of the Year, I'm like, I have no idea what's going to happen here. But I do think, even if you only want to say there's a 40% shot he wins, I think Smart is ahead of the field right now. There's just so much that can change in the final 2 weeks of the season.
Chirag, what's your outlook?
This award has confused me, and I thought that other players were going to be able to run away with it. I was on the Bam bandwagon too, but now it's just like, give it to Smart. Let's give it to a guard. Let's change things up. I like chaos, so give it to Smart.
Guys, any parting thoughts before we do get out of here? I know there are no Madden Sims tonight. Those will return with a full 6 tomorrow, but nevertheless, we tend to wrap up right around 6 Eastern to get people time to go back, rewatch, relive the show if they want to, and of course, get toward lock and get all their prep in. But Chirag, anything you want to add before we do go?
Let's go Wizards. Let's see where that line got to. Do we get that line before we jump off? Where did that line end up at?
now.
Yeah, so we have value. Playing it exactly like what he said.
4.5 as expected.
Yeah,
that's what Matt said. So take the bet. That's where I'm rolling with. Let's make some money tonight on the Wizards.
How about yourself, Matt?
A quick award to click into. I can just mention this in 10 seconds. Evan Mobley is now dealing with an injury. I think it was his knee that he hurt against Orlando last night. I may have that. Okay. Ankle. Okay. Scotty Barnes, if Mobley doesn't play again this year, like, we don't know. He had an X-ray. He doesn't have a broken bone, but this could be a sprain where he's out the rest of the regular season. And the Raptors are going to, by all accounts, pass Cleveland to make it above the play-in tournament. Right? Like, there's especially if Mobley's not there, they already don't have Jared Allen. Their interior defense is kind of like, Moses Brown might be their starting center if they don't have both of those guys. Their interior defense is going to drop off. They're probably not going to retake the 6 from Toronto. So if you get the situation where Mobley doesn't play anymore this year, the Raptors get above the Cavs in the standings, I think Barnes can definitely win Rookie of the Year. So this line's come down already. It's only plus 300, but be aware of this Evan Mobley potential update, because I think Barnes he still has a shot. This is not something I would have said even 2 days ago. I thought Mobley had this locked up, but these last few games, like, in terms of narrative, I think could be a really big deal. So I definitely would keep an eye on Scotty Barnes.
So there you go. You have a couple, couch shekels rolling around, $5. Throw it on Barnes, see what happens. All right, we thank all of you for hanging out here with us for the last 45 minutes or so. Daniel, our technical director, Eamon, as always, our producer, of course, Matt Meisman, Shrug Hira. I'm Adam Kaufman. The Slate comes your way every weekday, Monday through Friday, after the 4 o'clock Madden Sim, right around 5:15 Eastern. The Sweat, mornings at 11 o'clock to noon. Make sure you check that out as well. Tomorrow, a Wednesday, it's a golf show with the Masters right around the corner and some big Tiger Woods news from Augusta. But of course, first there is the Valero Texas Open this week and odds to get into with that. So make sure you check out that show. We thank you for hanging out, guys. Pleasure as always. Matt, I love the hat.
Go Celtics. Yeah, we'll recover.